So you need to remove these two screws in order to remove the electronics box. I also have removed these two screws for that auxiliary plug, just to make this whole process easier. So the electronics box will fall, if not right at the beginning when you start pulling out. And inside the electronics box, these are the two encoder cables, the black wires. They're held by this strain relief here. All you have to do to remove that is pull on it, because these cables just go into this little channel here. And depending on which axis you need to replace, you will need to remove either the RA or the deck. And they have little tabs that you'll need to push before pulling up. Make sure you push it in and are wiggling, and try not to pull too hard, as these are 28 gauge wires and they are very delicate. After unplugging the encoder cable from the electronics box, you can then pull the cable up through the RA axis, like this. Now you can remove the worm block. There's 4 screws. I've already removed 3 of them, so we'll just remove the last one. You'll also need to make sure to unplug the homing sensor cable, which is fed through this hole here. Now the encoder cable has to be fed through the opposite way, because it is still connected. So you can pull it up through here. And in order to remove the worm block completely, in RA you'll have to pull the cable up through the deck cable. There's a loop, so you can just unplug it without having to pull it through the shaft. To replace the worm block in RA with encoders, you need to feed again through the back side and then through the front, making sure to pull all of the slack so there's no cable in here getting in the way of replacing the worm block. You also need to make sure to plug in your RA motor cable so that can be put back down into the tube. When you're pushing it in, make sure not to grab the sensor cable, because you still need that. So push that all the way down in. And then make sure you have the homing sensor cable and feed it through the hole here. And then plug it in. Making sure that you can see all of the cables and aren't pinching in any of them, you can replace the RA block. Again, you'll need to replace all 4 screws, and I suggest tightening them up with a T-handle. In order to install the encoder cable for the RA, again, it doesn't hurt to fold the cable before you tape it. Just to keep from pulling on those fragile little wires. And the tape keeps from being able to, or snagging on any of the extra cables in there, making it easier to feed. So for the RA axis, the easiest thing to do is be able to put your hand through the back side of the mount, and then you have to first feed the cable up through here so that the encoder cable is behind this on the worm block. And then using this guide, this cam guide here, it helps you guide this zip tie in, so you're pretty much just going straight down, and then the zip tie will hit the bottom of the tube, and that's where the hole is down here. And so you put one arm in the back and you can feel around for the zip tie. You'll want to push down and it'll move around while you've got your finger in the hole, so you should be able to grab it. Probably will take a little bit of practice, but there aren't too many cables that will get in your way. I can feel it right now, but it seems to have caught another cable, so we're going to try again. Now there's two holes. There's one in the front and the one in the back, and you're reaching through the one in the back towards this side of the mount. And sometimes it'll go just through, just like that one did. So again, if you can push through the cable this way instead of pulling, that helps save the ends of the little tiny wires. And you want to just pull all of the slack down through here. Now it's in the right spot, it's just in the back of the mount, so you'll just want to pull it up towards the front. Then you can remove the electrical tape. To plug it in. Now there's extra slack here again, and this one you can just put your hand in the back again and feed it up through so that the slack is up in this area here, and you don't have to worry about that when you're putting the electronics box back in. Okay, so before replacing the deck worm block, you have to take the deck encoder cable, and here's your zip tie. The thick end goes up here. With the deck, since you have to pull a little more on it, we like to fold this here so that you're pulling more on the cables than you are on the connector and those gentle wires, or those tiny wires. So we just take a piece of electrical tape and wrap it around. Next, you take the worm block and you have to feed it back through the back end of the worm block. Pull out as much slack as you can. Now you can use somebody to help you, because an extra set of hands might be helpful. So you have to plug the sensor cable in through that hole and into its connector here. And then before you put the worm block all the way back in, you use your zip tie and feed it through down here. Here's where an extra set of hands might be helpful. You can see the black zip tie, and you want to pull it here. If you can feed it through from the cable as opposed to pulling on the connector, that's best. And then you just want to pull all that slack through. The reason you want to do the sensor cable beforehand probably is to keep from pulling it all the way through. You can do it after. You can plug this in after pulling the encoder cable through, but make sure not to pull it back down, because that's one extra step that you have to do. Next, I push down on this connector just to make sure that it's out of the way, and then you can install the worm block. One of the biggest things is making sure that you don't pinch any of the cables, especially the sensor cable because it's really thin. And you want to make sure that you have this one pulled all the way through. Right. Then again, these are handy because you can just hold the screw in there and do this one-handed. So you want to replace one of the screws. You can see it. So once you have one or two screws in, you may have to pull this out of the way in order to get to the screw behind these motor cables. It's right next to where the sensor cable is, so you can push it out of the way as well. Once you have that screw in, you can connect the deck motor back in. And then that one sits pretty much up in the worm block. After you can put once all the screws are in, you can put the cover back on. But in order to run this cable, you can make sure to push down on this in order to be able to rotate your axes. Push down on the worm block so that you can rotate the shaft in here by rotating the Versa plate. You want to be able to see the circle part, and there should be some light that shines through from the back. This helps you guide your zip tie down there. So the encoder cable you want to go on the right side of the tube, so you put it around the black shaft and start feeding it down into there, and you should be able to see it pop out, as you can tell in the video, and then you can push it all the way down through and use your hand on the other end to grab the zip tie. And then you can just pull it all the way through. The last part of running the deck encoder cable is just sticking it straight down through here into the electronics box. And again, if you can feed the cable more than pulling on the end, that's always helpful. There's lots of cables, so you might have to move them out of the way. You don't want too much slack, so if there's too much, you can pull again from here to make sure that there's loop and extra slack in the deck axis. And you can remove the electrical tape. And plug that into its respective plug.